Hi, everyone. I'm Avi Schneier, a Principal Agile Transformation Consultant with Scrum Inc. And I'm here today to talk about what you need to do before you prioritize and begin working. Generally speaking, a lot of us think that prioritization is the first step before we start, but there's a misunderstanding there that before you can prioritize things, you need to understand how you're going to prioritize things. And a lot of times when we go into a company, whether it's a startup or a Fortune 500 organization, they have this huge backlog of all the stuff that they want to do, but they don't have it in any priority order. And they complain about that. And then when we ask them, okay, so how would you prioritize this? They also don't have any way that they would. So, because for them, it's like, priority is a multiple. There are top priorities. And in some companies, there's as many as 100. And that doesn't make a lot of sense. So one of the things that we try to do when we get to that point is we try to say, okay, we've got your big backlog of all the projects you want. Now let's backtrack a little bit and go to what the steps you should have taken were before you did this, so that we can then resort this out. So most everybody in Agile land knows about this idea of a vision, a product vision. We try to do this with large companies, not just at the product level, but at the program level and even at the portfolio level, because it's very hard to prioritize products if you don't know what the vision of the portfolio was supposed to be. So before you start your prioritization of all your things, you want to craft a vision for your portfolio. Now, once you've got this idea kind of down on paper, and we do a regular visioning session, like I'm sure most of you do, using a product vision template or canvas, you can do the same at the portfolio level. And one of the major questions we like to ask around that is, where do you want to see yourselves in 1 to 2 years? I don't like, I personally am not like a big fan about the 2-year part. I even want to just talk about the 1-year part. I want to really focus in on where are we going in a couple of quarters. In some of the larger companies, though, they do a lot of 5-year planning. And so anytime I've got somebody with 5 years, I'm trying to drag it down to 3. If they're at 3, I'm trying to drag it down to 2 or 1. And if they're there, I'm like, okay, great. Let's start with that. So here's the first place we start is, what is the overall vision for what we're trying to achieve from a collective perspective? And that's a very revealing conversation, especially when you ask questions around things like, not just where do you see yourselves, but what do you want people to say about your stuff? And not just each individual project, but again, from an overall portfolio perspective. Once you've got that vision kind of set, you can then begin to discuss what are the ingredients to making that vision a reality. Now, in that conversation, you may also want to talk about why we can't realize that vision tomorrow. See, in discussing the things that prevent us from reaching that vision, we will begin to uncover backlogs, which might be projects or products that we didn't think we need in order to make that whole thing happen. That's a big part of trying to develop your initial roadmap before prioritization, is you have to understand, what are the things we want to make? And do we need to make anything in order to make those things? Are we going to buy out of the box solutions, or are we going to build those things ourselves? And it doesn't matter if we're talking about software, like, do we need to build some type of architecture, or are we talking about hardware? Is there a new intake valve that we would need to build in order to make our thing work the way we want it to? So we like to discuss it from the idea of looking at both, what do you want to make and what's stopping you from having that, like, literally tomorrow. From that, you start to get that initial list together again. Now, many of those projects and products are already on someone's backlog somewhere, right? They're already in existence. We need to get them in one place so that we can begin to prioritize those based on achieving that vision, not just everything in the world is a top priority. And this is where the pre-prioritization work starts to happen, the vision, and then how do we decide what the order is? So here's where we're going to recommend, or at least I recommend specifically, some type of a prioritization matrix. Now, a prioritization matrix, and there are various ones out there you can find online. Sometimes it's as simple as things like ROI, We're just going to take a look at what is the proposed effort and investment and divide that out and figure out what our return on investment would be. And that's great. That's great. But it's for me, it's really not detailed enough. I tend to use other metrics around this. So I like a lot of us are familiar with the WSJF, weighted shortest job first. And I like to combine that idea with impact value. So I have everybody go through an assortment, say, okay, what's the impact value of all these things? And then now let's take a look at business value, urgency, opportunity, and then create some kind of, if you take those numbers or any other metrics that the leadership group wants to look at, and then divide that by effort or our proposed notion of effort to come up with a very objective prioritization number. And the results of that are usually very interesting because things that we think we should be doing immediately, we realize, wait a second, when you realize the urgency part of it, maybe some other things should come up. And so we're looking at different facets that they may not have considered when they thought about prioritization initially. There's a lot of good stuff to be had in there. One of the other things that we think about when it comes to looking at this, kind of impact versus feasibility kind of idea before we build our roadmap is our business cases. So we want to make sure that each one of these products and projects that we're about to embark on has a solid business case. And does it have a vision? And does that vision align to our overall portfolio vision and strategy? Because some of these things may be going off in aberrant directions. And if they are, then we have to question ourselves, do we want to bring these things into heel and go in that same direction? Or is that vision really divergent? In which case, maybe we shouldn't be doing it, right? This then helps to weed out some of those parts. Now, weeding out is another big part of the pre-prioritization business, because you have to realize if you ask all the executives in the company, hey, what do you want us to make? They want you to make way more than you ever could in way less time that actually exists and with nowhere near the budget that's required, right? Give us everything, give it to us yesterday, and at half the cost that we ever projected. So that's never going to happen, right? Another part that we do, if we can, and it's not always possible in every company, is try to establish a baseline of capacity. How many projects did you deliver last year and the year before that? Because if we can't understand what the overall group or overall company's capacity is, then you end up in a case which we had at an automaker we were working with once, where we came in to do the workshop and I said, okay, great. How many projects do you have? And they're like 927. And I'm like, oh, awesome, right? And how many projects did you do last year? Oh, 118. And I'm like, well, something doesn't compute. So we're gonna list these 900 plus projects, and then we're gonna draw a line. And everything under that line is probably not gonna get done. So there's a lot of conversation that has to be had around what are we willing not to do or not have done in the current year or 2 year or whatever your roadmap potential is. And those are some tough conversations because nobody wants to give up their babies, right? Nobody wants to do that. But if you use an objective prioritization matrix model based on things like business cases and business value, but understanding that there are other parts to this, like intangible benefits of expanding brand recognition and things of that nature, urgency and opportunity. If we can make this objective model, then people, even though they get their feelings a little bit hurt, they can begin to live with it because they begin to understand, yeah, this is my pet project and maybe it has a projected revenue of $100 million, but that's nothing compared to this person's project, which has a projected revenue of $500 million and is in a blue ocean in a place where we don't have any competition or no major competition compared to my project, which I love, but is in that red ocean. And maybe we shouldn't do that. So it's a lot about creating an understanding and an environment for understanding with all of the leadership involved, because everyone's gonna, be a little bit upset. I'm commonly asked all the time when we do these workshops, and they're almost like negotiations, right? Mediations. Like, is everyone going to leave happy? And I'm always saying, no, if everyone leaves happy, we didn't do our job, because there's probably a lot of wrong stuff that nobody discussed. a really good mediation, negotiation, and good prioritization session, everybody leaves a little bit upset because they're not getting everything they wanted in the order that they wanted it. They're getting it with a more objective understanding of this is what's better for the business. So you need to set all of that up before you go into this massive session of, whether it's a big room planning or a big, a big road mapping session for the quarter of the year. You need to go in with that attitude that I'm going to come in here with my stuff. We're going to objectively prioritize based on data, some kind of empirical model. And I'm not going to leave with everything I want. And that's okay, because it's not about me, it's about the company. And this is what will enhance overall business agility. And this is what then turns into the backlogs that get discussed, whether you're talking about the executive Metascrum in a portfolio level, whether you're talking about Metascrums at the program or product level, so that these things can be pulled, decomposed, and then transferred to the teams so that they can begin working on them in priority order. And all of this pre-prioritization work ends up with everyone in a better place than, hey, here's all the stuff we want to do by the end of the year and by the end of next year and by the end of 3 years from now. Go do it. That's not a plan. That's a plan to fail. That's a plan to fail. You have to have rigorous and ruthless prioritization schema before you start. Now, some of you might be saying, well, we need to start anyway, and that even figuring out that schema might take 6 months. I understand completely. Go in there with something, even if it's just using the Fibonacci sequence and planning poker and estimating what's the business value, what's the urgency, what's the opportunity, what do we think the effort is. Go in there with something is better than nothing, and it's better than having everything as an equal level of prioritization, because that is literally a recipe for failure. It's a recipe for conflict. And I'm not talking about the conflict of, hey, I wish it was my thing and it's yours. I'm talking about full-on conflict that we see all the time in very unhealthy organizations, where everyone is clamoring for what they would call resources, what I would prefer to call people, to do this work. And if you can do that and prioritize, you will drive more things to done in that shorter time frame by focusing than you ever would by having everything as the top priority. So in summary, before you can begin to prioritize your product list, you've got to think at the portfolio level. You want to set that vision and make sure that those product visions are going to align to it. You have to consider what might be in the way, what other backlog you might need to develop to make that vision a reality. You need to weigh these things out as objectively as possible. We want to go from EBDs, emotionally based decisions, to EBDs, empirically based decisions or evidence-based decisions. That's what you need to do. So you create this model, whether you're using impact and feasibility, whether you're using other methods like cost of delay and WSJF, whatever it is, get some type of prioritization matrix going. Feed everything through that system, create your roadmap, and then this will help you to prioritize in a much better way and give you a greater chance of success, not just from achieving your product goals, but from achieving your holistic goals as an entire organization. I hope this helps. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Take care, everyone.